Hi everybody, welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. My name is John Sinclair and my co-host Mark Palavestra.
Hi John, today we've got a very influential speaker and automotive executive from the Asia Pacific region, Christophe Di-Perna. Christophe is the Chief Sales Officer for Allianz Partners for Automotive for the Asia Pacific region, but has over 20 years experience in the OEM space in Asia Pacific. And this is where all Australian sales companies report through a Asia Pacific office back to the head office. And Christophe covers some amazing insights on what's happening in the Allianz business, but also what is actually going on and how the Asia Pacific office work with the Australian sales companies to get products to Australia and also work around the challenges of supply chain and exchange rate and some other bits and pieces from scale. He also gives us some really good insights into where he sees the future of automotive and the products that we'll be driving now and in the short and distant future.
Yeah, Mark, a really good discussion. He covered some very interesting topics, especially around EV and where it's been driven by China and how many new brands in that market. And then got into a lot of detail around the Australian market and the opportunities we have in our market and where he sees the future of the Australian market. So very good discussion, and to have someone of his knowledge and experience sharing those thoughts with us, it was a really good and worth a listen.
If you want any information about the subjects that we've covered in today's podcast, please feel free to reach out to either John Sinclair or myself, Mark Palavestra, on LinkedIn, and we will respond with information or help you with any other detail. In today's podcast, we have an esteemed operative from the Asia Pacific region, Christophe Di-Perna. Christophe currently is the Chief Sales Officer for Allianz Partners for Automobiles, based in Hong Kong. Welcome, Christophe.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, John.
Yeah, welcome, Christophe. Good to have you on the show.
Likewise, thank you.
Maybe to start off, can you just tell us a little bit about how Allianz is structured from an APAC Pacific point of view?
Yeah, I mean, Allianz Partners is part of the Allianz Insurance Group. And so we are having, of course, a regional office. Actually, we have a few, let's say, locations for regional office because we try to be as close as possible to our key markets and our key customers. Because as you know, we are offering insurance and assistance solutions, one-stop shop for OEM in order to improve loyalty, customers' experience, and also to prepare for the next stage of automotive paradigm, if I may say. I mean, with the telematics, the electric vehicle, and the fully digitalization of the world. So regional offices, but very much small teams, but very agile and, for the time being grounded because of the COVID, but normally pretty much close to customers. So we use video conference a lot to be closer to our customers right now.
And Christophe, what are the trends that you're seeing with insurance and also roadside support?
We are very much on the back of the automotive transformation. So what we can see is, of course, a very intense integration of services, valued services towards customers. Make sure that every point of contact is qualitative and well perceived, and so for OEM this is key to keep a very close contact with their end users. So, as such, being a leader in the B2B2C environment, we are working hand in hand, I would say, with OEM, and to make sure that the customers are well serviced. So the trends we can see is, of course, a very strong telematics. That's been a lot of data being transferred, a lot of information being live. And consequently, somehow a better service, better anticipation of even breakdown. So we can see things more proactive and less reactive, which is very good for insurance, very good for consumers, and very good for OEM at the end, because it's a time issue. It's less, let's say, cars immobilized. That's been less cost for insurers, better service for consumers. So we can see a moving trend towards that, and it's across the board. Whether you go in India, whether you go in Australia or in China, I mean, this is a very across the board. And then, of course, when you have electric vehicle, we can see also a very new way of people consuming mobility. That's mean, for instance, we can see a lot of things related to lease increase or subscription models being widely developed. And so that's a massive change for all of us, and on the way people are interacting with the insurance, the assistance, or the OEM. So it's a new way of catering for consumers. They have access to a lot of more data. They have access to a lot of more services. So we have to make sure that everything is connected. So it's a real IT challenge, but it's a great opportunity.
And what do you see as far as the changes with mobility in the region, with ownership and subscription services? And where do you guys fit in with that?
I mean, traditionally, let's say the world was pretty much like, 60, 70%, private ownership, but we can see smooth in some countries and a bit more drastic in some others. We can see, of course, a lot of appetite, if I may say, for, let's say, usership. That's mean not ownership. First, because currently there is potentially an economical crisis, so there's definitely a downturn in the automotive worldwide. So we can see that consumers probably are less inclined to acquire an asset, but they are far more flexible in actually leasing or subscribing to the lease of a car for 1, 2, 3 years. So the flexibility is definitely a new pattern in the mobility. So flexibility means different ways of owning the cars. What we can see is also, of course, depending on the country, public transport, policies or strategy or investment. I mean, either a rise in the appetite for having cars because of the COVID, for instance. I mean, people rather be in private cars than in public transport in some countries. Overall, the trend is that more leasing, more flexibility, less ownership. That's been less sales to a private individual. So the way we cater for that is, as I was saying earlier, it's all about technology, because then you are allowed to have more information about consumers through a leasing. You are able to have, or you are able to provide actually a good services or good insurance products that could be based on durations, on mileage. So flexibility and agility is really the key. And depending on countries and regulation, we adjust to it, and we are happy to do so.
With the Chinese market, because China is the big driver with Asia Pacific, how is China influencing product development in the Allianz space?
In the Allianz space, it's of course the electric vehicle is really what China is driving. First, they are number one in the world in terms of EV volume. Second, they are also at the forefront from the battery manufacturing. So for us in Allianz business, of course, when the battery represents 30% of a car value, it has an impact on the insurance, and that's where we are working very closely with the Chinese authority or Chinese regulators in order to have a very competitive and very unique EV offers to customers. So that's number one. Second, EV does not come only with insurance specificities, it comes also with very specific services. So China is definitely driving the change by the volume aspect, by the numbers of brands which are actually being developed in China for electric vehicle. Because since you don't have the need of motorization, I mean, EV seems a little bit easier to manufacture than a normal ICE cars. And we have like 60, 70 brands in China which are now manufacturing EVs. I mean, that's something very unique. And but the market is 20 million cars, so it's 1 car out of 3 in the world, or slightly very close to that. So the appetite is there, the consumers are ready, the infrastructure is there, the government is pushing. So for us, we have to, once again, being very agile and very adjusted to that specificity of China. And accordingly, they will export some of these cars to neighboring countries or even European or American countries in the years or months to come. And so, consumers are also expecting very similar services or very similar approach. So our job is to make sure that we are able to develop things that can be scalable and ultimately can be reused in some other countries, most probably and most precisely in terms of services. So EV services is really the things that we are currently deploying on a worldwide basis, yes.
Christophe, what's quite interesting for us is, from Australian perspective in automotive, we always report through to an Asia Pacific office or a Middle East office and then onto the global headquarters. Can you maybe just from your experience explain how that Asia Pacific office works and how it's normally structured?
Yeah, I mean, I had a few in the last 30 years. I had there's not one truth, let's say, first and foremost on that, because I had probably 3 or 4 different experiences in the regional offices role and duties and actions. But overall, let's say that technology is probably shifting the way and the approach that the regional office were having before, because before they were a kind of conduit of information from markets towards headquarters. I guess today, with the information technology being what it is, with the big data being around, with the communication being what it is, I mean, regional office need to bring not only information, but let's say valued information, and being able to actually translate that into the headquarters. So I guess the role of a regional office needs to be a combination between, of course, understanding market data, but making sure that they also translate that into the global strategy of the company, to make sure that every individual market is well taken care of. And then their job is sometimes to do aggregator of this market in order to reach economy of scale, because automotive is all about scale, but I guess also differences are quite big between countries. But at the end, try to find out what are the common points, what are the strengths, the weakness and the strengths of each and every of them. And as everything in life, when you have 10, 11, 15 markets to take care of, some of them are working fine one year, some of them are working less fine the next year. So I guess at the end, the regional office is also playing a buffer role in making sure that the headquarters is not making sometimes drastic measures because of misunderstanding of what's happening in a country on one year, because of natural events or economical downturn or whatever. So I guess it's to put things in perspective, to make sure that they are aggregating things. But now with the speed of data, they have to be extremely, agile once again, but very much aware of what's going on, and making sure that things are not stop and go. I guess the biggest risk of regional offices sometimes was just to be the conduit of headquarters. But at the end now, I guess it's working hand in hand with headquarters to make sure that the flow of information is very factually based, and then they are also that some countries might not interfere with the global strategy, but the sanctions or the decision might not also be detrimental for the country future. So it's been an in and out discussion for years and years, the good, the bad way of doing it. I guess things are getting much faster now. So you need probably more experienced people, less people, because you don't need that much information. It comes to you very, very easily. But surely, the way things are transforming, you will need the regional to support countries, because distribution channels, new services, local regulations, technology, new competitors. Let's say, if I take Chinese OEM, are probably less known in Europe than they are maybe in Australia right now, or at least the volume is much greater in Australia. So you need to have that kind of data that need to be well shared and well understood at an headquarter level. So there's still a role to play for regional, but it's shifting smoothly from being a little bit more instrumental in the way the countries would report, and in the way the country would go through crisis or changes, rather than just copy and paste what is done in the headquarters back in the country. So it's a two-way street business now, rather than the one-way street. That's the way I look at it.
And Christophe, are the APAC regions changing their location? They seem to be moving around the different cities or countries within Asia. And is the focus changing as well?
As I said, automotive is all about scale. So when you have a country like China that is representing, 1/3 of the worldwide market, you tend to believe that you need to put your resources where your mouth is. Most of the OEM do have massive factories in China, so you tend to believe that it would be great to manage everything from China. But I guess if you look at Australia, for instance, 70% of the cars are coming out of Japan, Korea, or Thailand, which are also Japanese OEMs. So you might believe that being in China might not be a relevant regional office, then might not be the best place for regional people to travel around. So I guess very, very various philosophies. Either you believe that you have to put the money where your mouth is, that's where your volumes are in APAC, and then some of them do have a regional office in China. Either you believe that you need to, of course, deal with China in a different way than you are dealing with other APAC countries, which also makes sense because they are different markets as such. But I guess it has been, once again, a very back and forth situation for many OEMs. The truth, once again, is is probably in the middle. You can't ignore, of course, China, impact and so on, but you can't also just focus on China. I mean, there are also very significant markets outside of China which deserve, of course, a very strong care and attention. So there's no patterns that really emerge. I mean, if you take the top 20 OEMs, they are in various locations around Asia Pacific. But once again, if you take for Australia point of view, the fact that Japanese are very close to Australia, I mean, everything being equal, but you can see that, of course, the fact that the Japanese and Korean are dominant players in Australia is also because their regional office is somehow very close to their headquarters in their respective countries. So their truth is probably not the truth from European makers as such, or Americans. So I think the regional offices, I was saying, they will reduce, but they will be more adjusted to global strategies and to cost constraints. And COVID is actually changing against that, because regional means you need to travel around. Today it seems to be something of the past. So until things resume, I guess regional office will have to find a way to interact with their countries in a different way. So China, it's a continent by itself. It's twice the size of Europe in terms of automotive business. So you can't ignore it. But as such, you can't also take that as the only way of selling cars in APAC. I mean, it's the maturity of it, the segmentations, the consumers' behaviors, the financing capacities, and so on are very different. So I'm afraid I can't have a very definite answers. It's definitely something moving. We can see a lot of closures of regional office. We can see some new openings. I guess it's a story in the making, and it's not yet finished.
Christophe, from an Asia Pacific point of view, what are the expectations of, say, the local management in an Australian office? What would be the expectations from a regional office?
Well, Australia is. I mean, for us, for instance, it's a very significant country for us in automotive business. I mean, although it's 1 million cars. I mean, from an OEM perspective, from an insurer perspective, it's a very important market for us. Consumers are mature in their mobility consumptions. They are not the prime purchaser of cars. So for us, we have a very privileged relationship with end users in Australia. So I guess for us there, the challenge or the opportunities is to make sure that we put everything that we have, the best in many countries of the world or in places, to make sure that it's shared, discussed, and make sure that if there is something that would be of value for Australian consumers, we bring it into Australia. So that's number one. Number two is also to take care of Australia's specificities. You don't deal with EV in the same way in Australia that you would deal in Norway, for instance, because of the density, the size, the consumer behaviors, and so on. So we adjust all that, and then we make sure that we are getting closer and closer to consumers' needs, practices, and the country, specificities. So for us at the regional office is to make sure that we are able to combine, of course, insurance product and assistance services to the best to the end users, and to make sure that consumers will have a proper benefit of it.
Now, Christophe, from your experience in the automotive space, because a lot of, I suppose, consumers and even dealers wouldn't be aware of the reporting hierarchy of the sales company in Australia reporting into Asia Pacific. What are the APAC specific expectations of the sales company in Australia for automotive?
This I will come back to my previous years in when I was in the automotive business as such. I mean, once again, it depends. It's all about how much the OEM has, in the delegation of authorities, how much they value the country CEOs in Australia and so on. I guess it's a matter also of how much they are centralized, how much they are decentralized, how much the data are flowing into the companies and so on. But based on what I've experienced, I mean, it's a combination between, of course, you have to empower the people who are managing and leading the country, but on the other hand, just to make sure that, not only in terms of functional support like logistics, finance, IT, HR, and so on, but that's also, make sure that what people are doing in the country is also somehow aligned with the global strategy. I guess it's The regional office is there just to make sure that there is not too much digression, or if there are any digression, they are under control, if I may say. So I guess it's a watchdog, but not in a sense of being, very inquisitive. It's there to make sure that the value of the companies are well taken care of, that the consumers are well protected and well taken care of. So I guess it's more a CSR and more, a flavor or brand management point of view rather than just being the watchdog and the naughty regional or headquarter people. So I guess this has moved also very much in the last few years, because there's more and more people are taking conscious that the brand value, the consumer experience are really the key of the brand, and as such, I guess they put more emphasis on that. So communications, advertising, and make sure that the product are well marketed and proposed.
Christophe, in terms of some of the big challenges a country like Australia faces, there's long lead times, there's exchange rates, there's manufacturing right-hand drive. How do you address all those challenges? Because they seem pretty substantial.
Australians are known for being resilient people, and I guess when you want to sell cars in Australia, with the distance, the exchange rate, makes things a little bit more challenging. And the fact that you can't re-export any cars that land in Australia, that makes things pretty much like a very unique selling patterns. But of course, exchange rate, especially even right now, could be detrimental, because if you were to sell a car that needs to be 28 days on the boat rather than 8 days from an Asian countries, then of course you start your journey with, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6% deficit compared to your, let's say, regional competitors from a European perspective. So I guess the challenge there is to make sure that you know exactly what are the key elements in the value chains. So exchange rate is one of them. There's very little way of getting protected on that. You could do, but it costs a lot of money. So at the end, somebody has to pay. So it's not going to benefit the consumers too much. And at the end, if the company sells in euro, for instance, they have to consolidate in euro. So somebody has to pay at some stage. So whether you, let's say, keep the loss in the country or loss in the headquarters, that's the financial decision of the OEM. On logistics, time is time. So you can put your stock on the boat, fine. But 28 days versus 8 days, there is a cost to it. And so once again, somebody has to pay at some stage, or somebody has to absorb it. And so at the end, it makes Australia pretty much more regional players. And consequently, you can see that 70% of the volume is coming from Asia Pacific. So, coming from faraway countries is a challenge for Australia. But, they've been through it. But we could see also a few OEM that basically says, well, there's no sustainability on the Australian market, because I guess logistic is one of them, exchange rate is another one, but also scale, because a right-hand drive is 10% of the worldwide market. And as such, diversity is the enemy of OEM to a certain extent in terms of cost. I mean, if you don't have enough throughput for your right-hand drive, it might be a costly exercise to manufacture cars right-hand drive. I mean, there's only 3, 4 big markets, Japan, India, Australia on the right-hand drive, and UK, of course. So, but that's still not relevant on the global scheme of automotive to a certain extent. So this diversity has been an issue for many volume makers, because where the price are pretty much under tension. But that's the key element of Australia, right-hand drive, logistics, and exchange rate. And there was a bit of tax and homologation at some stage that were making the equation a little bit challenging. But once again, resilience is a key attribute of Australian people. So I know some of them did manage to go through that. But at the end, finance and figures are sometimes also can be very, very, not. I can say that they are not forgiving. So the reality sometimes is a little bit harder than the hope there.
And Christophe, from a region perspective, given all of those challenges, and you mentioned the right-hand drive products. It's very topical right now with the departure of General Motors from the Australian market, because they pulled out of all their right-hand drive markets. What sort of things does the APAC region do to assist in getting product and other support for the Australian sales companies?
Yeah, it comes back to the role of a regional office in an OEM world. I mean, in my time, in my automotive days, I mean, what we were trying to do is to do aggregation of markets. I mean, when you have small pockets of right-hand drive markets which are tentatively selling the same product, you try to be, let's say, smart is in between brackets, but you try to be smart in the way of packaging these products that they can fit each and every country, so there you can reach some economy of scale. So it requires, once again, a very strong knowledge of each and every country. That's where the regional office has a role to play, to make sure that they are able to find a common denominator and make sure that they are still able to provide products accordingly. So homologations, market understandings are key elements. So once again, it's data is key, but then you need to know what to do with this data. So aggregating them to make sure that you're able to provide products, even though niche to a certain extent, to 2, 3, 4, 5 countries in APAC, because there's quite a few right-hand drive countries here. This is what we were doing at my time, and I guess hopefully there are other OEMs doing it as well. That's also an opportunity somehow.
So is this the infamous or famous fish gum, that you'd have a fish gum that would be for the region?
Yeah.
And how would you describe the fish gum for those that don't speak French?
It's product definition. It's basically what you see from a car from the outside, and but there's a lot of things that you don't see from inside. And I guess this is how to make sure that you are able to align what everything is inside in a cost, because it's all related to cost. So making sure that the costs could be a transversal cost, and ultimately that some elements which are compulsory in one country could be sold also in another country. So it's a value equation analysis for each and every country, and try to find the best way to make sure that first you comply with country regulation, second you are not too far north in terms of pricing, and third that there's of course still some clusters or let's say segment of consumers that will be willing to purchase the product. So it's an interesting product price marketing exercise overall, but at the end it's been fairly effective in some products. I mean, it can't fit for everything for sure, but some product with a bit more high value, I think it's workable. It's workable.
So the key to success, especially for niche brands, is to get that trifecta correct. That just leaves the promotion side of it and distribution to finish it off.
Yeah. But electric vehicle will actually help a lot on that, because you will have definitely less, emission, engine things issues. So from an EV perspective, things will be probably easier to aggregate, right-hand drive opportunities. So that's also another opportunity somehow for even new players or niche players or new entrants.
Christophe, following on from that, what do you see as the EV trends for Australia? Where do you think Australia is going to go from an EV point of view? I would like to look in the mirror rather than to look in my crystal ball here, but I guess it's somehow it's inevitable that there will be some EV cars, let's say, to give a framework within the next 10 years. So I'm not being too risky on that, but it depends on many factors. First, EV is pretty much linked to overall, let's say, energy transition, government strategy, and OEM offer. Let's say the 3 ingredients are here. And then, of course, at the end, whether customers do have appetite for it or not. If I take China, as I was mentioning earlier, this is a country where government is, of course, very much, supporting, and it's part of their global strategy to have EV at the heart of their manufacturing and technology development, batteries, and so on and so forth. And so as such, that's why they are reaching a fairly good percentage of their mix. If you look at Norway, I mean, everything being utterly different from China, size-wise and so on, Norway, it's a country that, of course, its resources are pretty much coming from oil, but yet they have put a lot of emphasis on electric cars. And today, it's probably 1 car out of 2, if not 2 cars out of 3, which are EV cars in Norway. But they did it in a different way. Of course, government has sponsored a little bit the purchase of EV cars to offset the battery cost, but they also have given a lot of, let's say, less tangible benefits, like free car park in a CBD, free ferries, free highway tolls. So at the end of the day, it's also the way you consume your cars, and what are the, let's say, collateral benefits. So you have plenty of ways to promote EV. Either it's a
country strategy and because you are big manufacturers like China, either because you want to be also, of course, part of the CO2, reduction worldwide, and that's what Norway has done. For Australia, there's a lot of ingredients for me that would be extremely favorable for EV. I mean, first, the fact that Australia is what I call an horizontal country than a vertical country. That means for people to have their home charger at home, to have a home charger is very easy in Australia compared to any Asian cities, even China. So that means the public infrastructure is less important in Australia than it would be in any other country. So you can leave every morning with your tank full, if I may say, from your home in Australia. Then the range, with the current batteries technology, the range would not be the major issue right now. But of course, there is still a cost element because of the battery. But I could see some interesting development, the smart grid approach and the fact that energy companies are the new players into the automotive game. You might be able to actually resell your energy at night and pay back some of your total cost of ownership. You might be able to go for a subscription model. So I still believe the fact that a few OEM lately have launched their EV products in Australia with a good order taking and a good appetite demonstrate that there are some potential patterns. It might not be 50% of Australia market tomorrow, but one aspect that needs to be taken into consideration, we know that EV is basically ABC segment overall, but we also seen that there are some serious contenders or serious players coming with pickup on EV. It might sound a bit crazy for traditional Australian users of pickup, but they are coming with some very significant offers. And I guess when you know the size of the pickup market in Australia, I mean, this is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Price of oil today, probably not the most favorable for electric vehicle, but at some stage, it's not only the TCO, is also, what is your contribution for environment, and at the end of the day, so the total cost of ownership is not only oil. There's a lot of elements into it, insurance assistance. Ultimately, it's not good for EM traditional business model, but the maintenance for an EV is much lower than an ICE car. So from every angle, it seems that it's going to be inevitable that Australia will jump into EV. Percentage-wise, it's still a little bit early to say, but infrastructure is getting there. We ourselves are ready with some assistance services or even specific insurance. So let's see how. And there's a lot of offers coming from many OEMs on the EV. So my crystal ball says, might be. Everybody's looking at 10-15% of the EV market globally within the next 5 years. Yeah, I don't think Australia will be that far. To be very honest, 15 years ago when I was there, or when we were introducing diesel or downsized engine and so on, people say, Australia is V8, it will never go to 1.2, 1.4 turbo. Well, look at the situation today. V8 is becoming almost extinct, and then you have very efficient ICE, low displacement engine. So you don't change everything overnight. But I guess that's going to come with the flexibility of mobility, with the subscription model could be very helpful on that, I believe. So let's see whether my prediction would work or not.
Well, it's interesting, Christophe, because I've got a 327 Corvette behind me here. Numbers matching. It's a very unique car. You're a very good friend of the owners as well. Now, question I have, just around, you mentioned before China and how China is influencing. I'm keen to just do a bit more deep diving as to where your thoughts are on what potentially the influence of China on the Australian EV market. So what sort of products are they likely to bring this way, or is it just because their scale and manufacturing is going to have capacity to bring products our way?
Well, it's a combination of everything. First, they have, of course, scale. I mean, no one would argue on that one. Product quality-wise, pretty much becoming on par with the best of the planet. And third, they have let's say a significant advantage right now because let's say 60 or 70% of the electric vehicle batteries in the world are manufactured or China origin. So that gives them also the full package, if I may say, of product, technology, and scale. In addition, they are also very early adopters of technology. So they do develop actually very, state-of-the-art telematics or interaction with consumers. And last but not least, there are also, as I said, there was like 60 or 70 new EV brand in China. And I guess, and it's clear that they're not going to develop, traditional dealer network, because otherwise it's going to be too congested, it's going to be too costly. So they are also very innovative in the way they are promoting their cars and in the way they are selling their cars. Flagship stores, agency models, just name it. I mean, so they are very, very innovative approach. So once again, there is not one that's really emerged from it, but definitely some of the key patterns that we can see there will definitely be exported at some stage, because it will help consumers to acquire electric vehicle cars. It will help them to absorb this cost of batteries, and at the end, it's also, the cars themselves they are pretty much on the crossover. If you look at the market pattern, we are in a crossover country now there, so which is not so different from the Australian average of in terms of SUVs and so on. So they are getting there, and their products are there, and so therefore they become a new contenders on the OEM planet.
Christophe, in terms of, if you get out your crystal ball and have a look at the future, what's your view of the volume for the Australian market?
Well, Australian market has been trading pretty much close to the 1 million cars, on a regular basis for the last 15 years at least. It's very much linked to, Australia is 2.7 cars per household, so it's one of the most cars per families per household. So that's also something that you won't be able to increase numbers of cars that much, so you might just change the mix of it. But at the end of the day, it depends also on the numbers of how the population is growing. That's one aspect. So, Australia being, of course, a land of immigration, so it depends also how much people will actually join Australia. Number one. Number two, it's also the way people will consume their mobility. Whether they're going to use, sharing services or subscription model and so on. So you might see a change in the mix. Surely, probably a drop in private ownership and a bit more leasing. You're already a very strong leasing country, but you might see a bit different there, a pattern difference there. I think the million cars is still reasonable, but once again, it's also linked to the fact that 70% of the volume coming out of Asia. Lead time is very much quite, let's say, reasonable right now. So I guess with information technology, you might not need to bring that much stock in Australia. So you might end up probably having, the traditional 1 month extra that everybody was pushing towards the end of the year might be missing at the end. So yeah, 1 million minus 8% or plus 8% will be pretty much the pattern on the way forward, because the renewal of the park will be there, and the appetite of the youngsters will be something to take into consideration, whether they are keen on taking, their driving license or not. I think, that's also something to be taken into consideration. But overall, 1 million should be pretty much on the agenda, and immigrations, renewal, and mobility, and the youngsters, the way they behave with the driving license, if I may say.
And Christophe, the number of brands. So if that market is going to stay the same or potentially be reduced, because we're not going to have our borders open for some time.
Yeah.
So immigration will definitely slow. Buyer behaviour, you mentioned younger drivers not getting their licenses straight away, so they're deferring that purchase and maybe not even purchasing when you talked about subscription.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, where do you see the number of brands in this country?
If you look at the distribution in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, the top 10 still represent between 60, 70% of the market. So, and it has pretty much been more or less the same top 10 for the last 10 years at least. So, moving up and down. Some are leaving, but at the end of the day, you still have the top 10. And guess what? They are mostly, for most of them, coming out of Japan, Korea. So I guess this is what's going to be remaining the bulk of it. But then what you can see also, if you look at even at June sales, you see the emergence of the Chinese makers. I'm not here to do the preaching of Chinese makers, but you can see some very small signal or small data that tells you that they are the new players that we will have to think about. Whether they're going to come at the replacement of some old OEM, I mean, that's where the finance and the cost and the competitiveness and the strategy, whether Australia is a strategic or not country, the right-hand drive topic and so on might come into place. So you might see a few in and out probably because some OEM might feel that Australia is not anymore a priority on their radar because of right-hand drive, distance, competitiveness, and so on. And some of them might see that as a land of opportunity because it's a great market to be in, a lot of dealers, multi-franchise environment. So at the top 10, I don't see that many changes. I mean, we've seen some of them already mentioning that they might change the way they want to operate. So, but at the end of the day, within the top 10, I don't see too much of a change. The remaining 50 below or 40 below, there will be a lot of challenges. I mean, unless they are in very niche premium market, but there will be some big fight or some disappointment or maybe novelties on the way forward.
Christophe, in terms of fuel tops, do you see, we've spoken a lot about EV, but do you see any changes from a diesel petrol perspective?
Well, if I look at Europe, diesel is definitely decreasing due to regulatory framework and emission standard. I mean, there's not a single dollar invested by any OEM right now in diesel in Europe. So that's mean if you don't invest in R&D on diesel, that's mean basically this is a somehow dying technology, if I may say. So that's mean, and if you look at the OEM in Europe at large, I mean, they all speak about, let's say, EV, hydrogen, and so on. So diesel was pretty much a European, pattern, and it's fading away. China, Japan, they are not diesel countries by all means. So, the mix of diesel by a consequence of, the sourcing would tend to be going down. Of course, Australia with the pickup, you might think that diesel mix might still be pretty high, but as I said earlier, amazingly enough, even though there are heavy vehicles, but there are EV offers coming on pickups within the next 2 years. So let's see what will be the mix, and let's see what will be the pattern in terms of the fuel mix. But of course, diesel is definitely because of emission, not only, but because of course fine particles, which could be also as very damaging for health and for environment. So ultimately, I guess it might not be the most popular engine on the way forward.
And Christophe, you mentioned the agency model. So where do you see the dealer distribution going forward? And also your thoughts around network profitability, because there's been a lot of discussion around that. And there's been a lot of pressure across the networks. And then now agency is coming up with more and more brands. I'm keen for your view on that.
It's a thank you for the question, Mark. It's a tough question because first, I mean, if you were to go for the agency model in general, you need definitely to have to be ready in terms of digital support and capabilities. So that's number one. Second is, of course, you could see. You guys are automotive specialists there. You could see the drop in terms of profitability from dealers in Australia in the last few years, out of which, of course, some new regulation on finance, insurance have also been instrumental in their loss of, let's say, revenues to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, this is part of the normal, approach towards digitalization. I mean, we've been talking about cars being sold on the internet or being sold on agency model for many, many years. There's nothing new there, but it's just like, technology now is really, authorizing you to do it or allowing you to do it. Second, of course, is a change of pattern for dealers, but it's also an opportunities for dealers to have a new way of promoting and selling cars, and same goes for us. I mean, with digital approach, we can definitely do things a bit more, seamlessly for the consumers, user friendly, automatically populated data and so on. So I guess the way people are buying the cars, the way OEM wants to make sure that they are also delivering the best services, the best price, the best value for money, and so on. I guess this is a normal, let's say, not compression, but at least adjustment of the value chain. And at the end of the day, if the agency model is the opportunity, why not? Surely there will be some other way of doing so, but the car business has been pretty much the same for the last 100 years in terms of, manufacturing, dealers, pushing stock or whatever. So I guess there's definitely a need or an appetite or an expectation from each and every one of a change. As I said, if we are going down in terms of private cars being sold, and if there is a rise in subscription, the customers' relationship, the delivery of the cars, the PDI, everything will be a little bit different in the value chain. So yet you still need to have someone doing it in the middle. And that's where I guess existing dealers will find definitely a way to move forward. Equally for us, there's still a car park out there that we can really tackle and offers also unique services. So I don't see that as a drastic change that's going to kill everyone, if I may say, overnight. But I see that as a normal evolution and change that will be not inevitable, but at least people will have to work hand in hand with OEM to a certain extent, because at the end, it's to benefit the consumers and to make sure the consumers is loyal to the brand. And ultimately, for us, if they are loyal to the brand, they are loyal to the insurance and the assistance. So we're happy with that.
Christophe, and your view of car ownership and subscription in Australia, what are the timelines and how quick do you think that will roll out?
There are already some discussions. There are already some small offers. I mean, novated lease is actually not too far from subscription. So you guys in Australia have been actually pretty much, consumers are quite, let's say, knowledgeable about it. I guess the subscription model is more like the mobile phone approach. So, it will be a different pattern. It will be more the way it's packaged, be more the way the cars is serviced, the way the cars is, serviced not only in terms of maintenance, but all the collateral services that you can get out of it. So it's more about the easiness of use, whether you don't need to bring your car for maintenance, somebody can do it for you. I mean, there might be a lot of things that services will actually makes the subscription model even more palatable than, let's say, a novated lease, if I may say so. So it depends on the OEM strategy, depend on their positioning. I mean, it might not be the same positioning for, let's say, a luxury brand than for a volume brand or a premium brand. But, at the end of the day, with the economical situation, the way it is, with the maybe people do have less maybe confidence in the future. So they might rather have a subscription model for 1-2 years than to have a car ownership where the residual value or might be maybe a risk they don't want to take. So I guess it's also a different appetite from consumers. But I can see that being very well, a good option for Australians and for the young generation as well. So it might help the volume, as we were talking earlier, but it might also help the way consumers in Australia behave. You package things with your house, sometime in the mortgage with the cars. Well, here you might be able to have a subscription and you might have more flexibility in changing cars. So there's a lot of benefit out of it. So, consumers will have to do the math. But from what I've seen so far in some of the example we had, it's quite appealing. So let's see how the OEM will behave. But I've seen some good offers. So let's see.
Yeah, Christophe, thanks very much. I think we've covered some really complex subjects today, and we appreciate having your view and sharing your experience of these topics, because it's good to get a different perspective from different areas to help dealers and OEMs make the right decisions going forward. Mark, do you want to give a summary or?
Well, Christophe, I'm with John. I really thank you for joining us today, because we appreciate you've got a lot of area to cover, and there's a lot of things happening right now. But from the Allianz side of things, and this is where it's very much cutting edge with what you're doing with mobility and working with the development in the various markets for the shift from ownership to usership, and where subscription really comes into play, and the need to be flexible and agile in the services and the communication that you've got. And the connected car is a big part of that. And then when you covered off the very important subject of how Asia Pacific regions support Australia, but also manage and expect Australia, and how basically they've gone from being a watchdog to an organisation that is that conduit of between the market and the head office, but also making sure that customers are being looked after and the brand, more importantly than ever, is being preserved and not damaged in any way. And then there's the challenges that have to be overcome for the Australian market, which are those of exchange rate, which you can't, it's too expensive to protect. So you really have to go with the flow and you're at the mercy of that. And there's logistics, time is money. So vehicles coming from a further away production facility to this market, there's more cost involved and someone has to pay for that. And then there's the scale, which is the volume, given that right-hand drive is only 10% of the global market. How do you engineer products to be viable given those lead times in this smaller market? And I really thought it was an important one when you mentioned that delicate balance when you bundle up Asia Pacific countries into one unique model where you try to meet as many requirements that are mandatory for certain markets, but then you bundle them as added value in other markets. So you can actually get some scale and get product into Australia. And then there's the EV side of things and how China is very much influencing what will be coming our way, given that once again, we're within that lead time, those shorter lead times, which will give them a point of difference against the Europeans and the American markets. So an EV is coming and pickup will be an area where there will be EV activity, something that most of us here really don't even think of. We still think of them as A, B and C vehicles with a few SUVs thrown in for good measure. But that's a really big change that you foresee coming. And the last one is just the future as far as the volume, immigration, adoption for Gen Y, Gen Zs into buying cars and subscription. So will it stay around that million or even just under million for some time? And what pressure does that put on the composition of not so much the top 10, but the next tier of players, those players that are, say, under 1% market share? I recall vividly your words were, if you're under 1%, you're in the danger zone. Yes. So that is something for all brands to be very cognizant of, given exchange rate fluctuation. Fortunately, the Australian dollar has recovered, but when the dollar's down to in the low 60s or high 50s for the US, it's really hard work, and the same for the euro. But hopefully that's a good summary, Christophe, of what you've done.
I mean, that's overall, this is Australia moving from a push, let's say, approach to a pull approach, which should be more cost efficient and should benefit for the consumers and actually should benefit the dealers, because we can see lately that their transaction price is actually getting with less discount. So doesn't mean the consumers pay more. I think the consumer will pay the right price and the right value for money. So it's a normal adjustment. There will be maybe some pain and some disappointment, but at the end, on the long run, this is beneficial for the whole value chain. And I guess that's what matters, is the sustainability of it, and that's to make sure that every investment being made in the automotive will be paid back if people are adjusting accordingly. So yeah, good summary, Marx. Fantastic.
Thank you, Christophe. I have learned from the master.
All right. Christophe, thanks very much. It was excellent.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. It's always great to catch up with you, Christophe.
Gentlemen, Thank you again. I mean, all the best for the editing. And if you need anything, let me know. And it's good to catch up with you anyway. And let's be in touch. Now we have this fantastic Zoom stuff, so we can just make sure that, we don't lose contact. So looking forward to having a beer down under, I don't know when.
Yeah.
Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as we did speaking with Christophe. He has some amazing insights on the industry and the outlook for Australia. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and also tick the bell so you get notifications for when we have a new episode. There is an episode every week, and you don't want to miss out on the new speakers that we've got in the pipeline, with some fantastic speakers with some really good topics. We also have sponsorship opportunities, and if you're keen to explore a sponsorship opportunity for the show or in other activities, please reach out to either John Sinclair or myself, Mark Palavestra, on LinkedIn, and we're happy to work with you on a solution for you.
Yeah, everybody, thanks very much for listening. We enjoyed bringing the show to you. Have a great day.